Crowd for that. Colleagues, I'm going to invite, before we break, we're going to have one panel session quickly, and I'm going to invite Professor Mashau, Professor Charlie, and Dr. Sabeko to the floor, and we're going to ask them all the difficult questions this morning. Can we get one more mic, please? One more microphone. Oh, perfect. Prof wants to join us as well, Prof Nkosi. Yes, you can come through. Please join us. Can we get one more chair here as well? No, we're not going to ask you difficult questions, we promise. Actually, this does fit in your space, considering the fact that you're working with Sadila, so it does. I think it would. Can we get one more? You can sit here. I'll stand. It's fine. No, it's fine. And for some reason we didn't have a female, and then they decided to make the female sit right on the side. Okay. So colleagues, we're going to have an open discussion for the next few minutes, and we're also going to field some questions from the colleagues that are sitting. So the title of this particular summit was something interesting for us, because we're not just talking about the digital humanities. We're talking about the idea of how do we reimagine or reimagining Africa's knowledge future in the digital humanities. So how are we reimagining knowledge, Africa's knowledge future? So when we think of digital humanities, what comes to your mind when we start thinking of, we've been talking about digital humanities, very Eurocentric, but now when we say advancing in African digital humanities, what do you really need to now think about in contextualizing the digital humanities for us in Africa? And I think we picked up this some yesterday, but at first, before we can even start that, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves, because I think there's a lot of people here that may not know who you are. So just quick introduction, 1 minute, who you are, who you're married to, how much money you got in your bank, that kind of stuff. Okay, just a quick introduction, and then we'll come back to the question.
Thank you. My name is Jessica Mabaso, married to Sadila. I'm in the Escalator program. Yes, so I run the Escalator program under Sadila. Yeah, that's an introduction, right?
It's perfect.
Good morning. I'm Tinandaba Mashau, Deputy Executive Dean of the College of Human Sciences at UNISA.
Thanks, Rob.
Morning, colleagues. So I'm Usiya Charlie. The background, I work around the area of media, journalism, and communication studies. I'm a professor of this broad discipline. I'm with UNISA. I'm currently the director for the School of Arts. I'm also with Sadila, interestingly, as a STECO member, because I'm interested in this broad area of digital humanities. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone. I'm Johannes Sibeko from Nelson Mandela University, where I coordinate the Digital Humanities Hub. I am also with Sadila as part of their scientific committee, and also an executive member of the Digital Humanities Association of Southern Africa.
Okay, perfect. Now we know who's who. Let me start with you, Prof. Mashau, and we'll come back since you joined last. Prof. Mashau, African digital humanities, what exactly is it for us? What should we think about? How do we define it for us, and what should we be thinking about?
For me, it's more about interfacing between your traditional knowledge systems with modern technology, first and foremost. And therefore, issues around how do we decolonize this project is critical for me. And coupled to that, we also need to somehow unmask some undertones around the call to digitalize humanities. Basically because the African persona is not taken into consideration in the main. You'll realize that when utilizing technology, there are racial undertones. A white figure will seem to be much more acceptable in terms of configurations. But whilst if you use a blackface, for instance, in some instances, some context, you will discover that it's not acceptable. And further than that, we need to tap into the histories of Africa. Because in the past we did have technology. When you look at the kind of kingdoms, ancient kingdoms that we have had, Timbuktu among others, Yomapungubye, these are the people who would have used technology in their own right. And we need to tap into that history, the oral history, and make sure that we archive it in our age and time.
Yeah, please, thanks. I think that's an important point that you brought, Prof, is the fact that we think of ourselves as a primitive African context with no technology. And what you are bringing to the front is that we do have technology. We always had technology. And I think that's an important point that we maybe need to pick up on as well. Prof. Charlie?
Thank you so much, Denzel, and you are asking very difficult questions. But I think that a departure point for me around the question of African digital humanities and how we are reimagining them within the continent, I think that we have to start from the point that technology is a symbol of power. That is the very first thing that we have to start from. And to demonstrate this example, I think that as recently as the Trump inauguration, you would have seen that the people who were sitting in the first row with Trump were actually the people who are owners of the big tech companies in the world. Owners of Facebook, owners of Google, owners of Twitter, Elon Musk. So that just illustrates the sense that technology is a symbol of power, first of all. And so then the question is, how does Africa and Africans assert themselves within this broader conversation around technology and power? And I think that by then making an argument for African digital humanities, firstly is to demonstrate our agency within the global dynamics around power and technology. So then by asserting ourselves, we are certainly saying that we are here as Africans. And I think that the second thing, it's this broader argument around the West. I think it's Stuart Hall who makes a very complicated argument that the West is everywhere. And so in saying that there's African digital humanities, we are essentially saying that we are provincializing the West. So it's part of the argument of fighting back against the global power dynamics. So that is how I'm seeing it. Thanks.
I think that's an important point in terms of how the notion of African fights back against that knowledge systems. Johannes?
Much. So for me, I think the starting point is to understand Africa. So if we are going to look at digital humanities for Africa, then we need to understand what it means to be Africa, or what it means to do digital humanities in Africa. So it means going back to history, to investigate why we do things the way we do them, to understand whether this was really our tradition and our culture, or whether this was all that we had access to. For example, one time when we had a funeral at home, I didn't understand why, because the lights were on, why I was instructed to also light a candle. And my question was, what does this symbolize? No, there has to be light in the room, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But I'm like, there's that bulb, so why, is it not providing light? No, it has to be a candle, da, 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 da. So I'm asking them, before the candle, what were people using? And now that they are not using that, does it mean there's no light anymore? Or how was that transferred to the candle? And can we transfer that from the candle to the bulb? So there's that whole thing of us needing to go back to question what we assume is African. Yesterday there was a talk of Ubuntu, and we all have our own understanding of what Ubuntu is. But when we look around ourselves, do we really think Ubuntu is African? So some of those questions we need to go and question and say, this is probably imposed on us because other things like the being westernized and being looked at from the Western perspective, but is it really us or not? So I think for us to do African digital humanities, the first step is to understand Africa.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jessica.
Yes, I definitely agree. I think we need to, yes, take in the technologies that we're receiving, but also adapt them to what our traditions are. We have so many resources that are available that we get from external, and we sit with them here and we don't know what to do with them. If we were to really get to study them, adapt them in a manner that would improve our traditional way of doing for efficiency, because those are what the technologies are being used for. It's, we've been discussing here that it's more efficient to utilize technologies. We do more with it. There's more that we can do with it. So let's appreciate that, utilize it, adjust it to what we can utilize it for, and not lose who we are in the process. Because the scariest thing is that we would lose preserving what our South African roots and traditions are and become more westernized.
Yeah, and I think let me build up on that point. So there are three different dimensions. We unpacked a bit on what is African digital humanities, right? But there are three dimensions that we're looking at: teaching, research, and knowledge production. And look at the knowledge production part. We spoke about AI, and you know the challenge, and I keep saying this in every space, AI is good, but if we do not know the data sets that AI is tapping into, we run the risk of being colonized again in the name of technology and simply saying we are innovative, right? How do we then address this knowledge deficit? Because we have an historic marginalization of knowledge production in the African context, which means that irrespective of how we play the game of AI, we're already disadvantaged entering it, not just in technology, but in the terms of knowledge databases. How do we, as an African digital humanities, or what do we need to do to balance that knowledge base? Do we create our own knowledge bases and then compete with the global north? Or do we tap into that knowledge bases that are already there and start dominating it? What are your thoughts? Anybody?
Well, I think one aspect to it is that we come from a point of advantage in a much bigger way, because we bring the element of Ubuntufication of technologies. We bring the human and provide a different interpretation of what it means to be human in the face of these wonderful opportunities presented by modern technologies. Because in the main, you'll realize that the West perpetuates the ideal that in the near future, human beings have to be replaced by the technologies that we are creating. And forget that as much as men were created in the image of deity, technologies were created in the image of man. And they should be utilized to serve men. And that is where we can't do digital humanities without recentering umuntu and ubuntu in the process.
Okay. Prof. Charlie?
No, I completely agree with Prof. Mashao. I think that another thing for me that is important as we are doing research and we need to be attentive to is, and what African digital humanities can respond to is the argument that technology is neutral. I think that one of the things that we have seen in the last couple of months is reversal in terms of progress that have been made with regards to diversity and technology. So you saw a lot of companies revoking diversity policies that they've had, and I think that you would have seen that in relation to Google and the pressure that Google was put in terms of the name, I think it's Mexican Canal or something to that effect. You would also have seen the sense that diversity candidates need to be fired from all of these tech companies. And I think that is unfortunate because there is a lot of theoretical arguments that have been made around why we need to have diversity policies and practices in relation to technologies, and something that the African digital humanities can respond to. I think that colleagues would have recalled, I think it's the 2015 case where Google was embarrassed because their app that they've created could not identify dark-skinned people. And there's quite a number of other examples that have been made around the fact that when you eliminate diversity and multiculturalism in relation to technology, you then have instances where technology itself becomes a weapon of conservatism. And I think that we have also seen it around the statements that have been made in the last couple of months that, and I put it in quotation marks, that we are back. And obviously by we are back, it means that the racist conservatives are back and they are weaponizing technology to assess and do away the progress that has been made in the last couple of years. So I think it's an important area that we need to respond to as people who are doing a lot of work around content and platform issues.
I think before I come to you, Johannes, and I'm going to ask the floor if there's any questions so that we continue this conversation. Professor, you raise an important question. The fact that we've got these platforms, we want to define the African digital humanities on Western platforms. The challenge with that is that they can silence us because they may not want our ideology. How do we then challenge those? Because if you look at, for example, and we've seen this, for example, with the Facebook issue, when there was issues related to Palestine, Judaism, they censored it, right? So the fact is our interdependency is on platforms that we do not control. It means that no matter how much we try to shape an African digital humanities, they have the power to control the discourse. What do we do then? Because the reality is we're not producing platforms in the African context. So how do we address this issue? And then you can come after that.
Yeah, no, I'm sure we'll try and respond, but I'll just quickly give my 2 cents of opinion when it comes to this issue. you would have seen the conversation that is playing out around Starlink in South Africa, and how the owners of Starlink are actually refusing to comply with our laws, including the broad-based economic laws that they need to comply to. And compare that against how they reacted and the statements that they made in terms of Ukraine. So the great, and I'm putting this in inverted commas, the great owner of X and Starlink says that I'll just revoke any rights that you have in relation to Starlink. And so that just illustrates the ways in which we are under the control of people who can make decisions because they own the technologies that we use on a daily basis. And I think that your second question then is, how do we Africanize and decolonize these technologies? And I think there is an older conversation and argument in relation to these things. And one of my favorite ones is a conversation between Chinua Achebe and Gunku wa Thiong'o, and their argument around how do we Africanize and decolonize literary studies, right? And obviously we know that Gunku wa Thiong'o was responding in relation to the use of African languages in relation to literature. And that same argument can be applied to platforms. Most recently, I saw a funny tweet where someone was, there's this old, I don't know whether to call it a joke or something, around how South African, and particularly black South Africans, converse on Twitter. And it's generally a critique on how we start our sentences in English, but then finish them off in an African language. And someone was like, can't you guys finish a sentence in English? And it just shows the ways in which we are indigenizing, the platforms that we've got access to. And of course, the reverse argument on that is the argument that was made by Chinua Achebe in terms of still using the platforms in the language that we have received them, but also being able to respond and critique the platforms themselves in the language that can be understood by everyone. So there's no easy answers to these things, but I think that we have to take a position.
Johannes and then Jessica.
Oh, thank you. So to your previous question, so there are two approaches that are taken. Jessica and Marisa will correct me. But I know of a project from, I think it's UJ, where they are collecting people's recipes in order to feed them to OpenAI, so that if you want to say, I don't know how to say how to cook Morocco in Afrikaans. If you want to type how to cook Morocco, then it can then respond to you in Afrikaans. So a lot of people are volunteering their own recipes to feed into that. So contributing to the dominating platforms. And then in another instance, projects like Lilapa AI, Masakani, and etc. are developing African-centered AI. And then also at UP, there's a project on copywriting AI and digital humanities artifacts for Africa. So with new licenses that are focused on Africa, so it's open access to anyone who's using it in Africa, and then it's paid for anyone who's using it outside Africa. So all of those things are some of the ways that people are already trying to fight for their own space in these different conversations.
Jessica?
Thank you. I think the bigger challenge is that we as South Africans are trying to dominate technologies that don't belong to us. And we should be bold enough to actually develop technologies that belong to us, and we can freely engage and utilize these platforms. I mean, we do it with so many other events. For example, our music goes internationally and is well applauded. We have choirs that go internationally. We have so many things that are recognized out there, but with our technology, we are so inferior. We want to be appreciated by the externals instead of appreciating ourselves. I think we have the capacity, we know what we want, and we should define digital humanities in our context and what we believe digital humanities is for us. We've got broader, we've got a broader grounds for digital humanities as well. When we look at our languages, for example, our languages are not constrained to, for example, isiZulu is such a broad language. There's isiZulu in Mpumalanga, there's isiZulu in KwaZulu-Natal. People argue that the originalities of isiZulu. So we have so much that we need to still further investigate internally, that we can't be looking to adapt what we have to the westernized models. We need to really look at ours and develop our models to suit what we have.
I think I agree. We need to shed off the consumer mentality syndrome. Because in the main, we have been recipients of whatever, including technologies. Whilst in our midst, we have the wisdom to innovate. And we should be innovating. And our students yesterday demonstrated that it can be done.
Yeah.
And therefore, we need to push the frontiers and ensure that we are innovating. But we must also at least push the envelope as far as the policy framework is concerned. Because that's where everything starts in terms of ensuring that we are agile in transforming the policy framework. I mean, take for instance the use of ChatGPT. We see it with colleagues who someone will say they are far ahead of us because they are able to use these technologies to write articles. But universities are not there to investigate the credibility of whatever is being produced, whether it's acceptable or not. So,
No, I think that's an important point. Let me open up the floor. Any questions relating to this? One question in the back. And somebody else? Anyone else? Okay, we got two questions. Let's bring the audience in a bit, the colleagues in a bit from the audience. We've got two questions. One, Prof. Van Wyk, and in the back.
Thanks. I think on the question of where do we start and how can we decolonize African humanities, I agree with all the speakers on the panel there that we don't want as Africans to innovate. And we don't want to write about it. We don't want to record about our innovations. Hence, I don't see it nowadays or currently. I can say it's a black and white thing. I think it's tribalism to me. If it's a black and white thing, my example will be the film of Harry Potter, for example. If Harry Potter was black, was it going to sell and fly all over the world like that? But the concept is black. Our grandfathers and forefathers were flying on the broom. That's our innovation. Because we didn't write about it, we didn't record about it. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. Our grandfathers were speaking amongst each other, just pouring a water on the bowel. And they communicate from Limpopo to Bloemfontein or Free State. In the mines, it was happening. But we are afraid and ashamed to talk about it. So why I said it's tribalism, because when the concept of innovation is brought, I will talk about South Africa because I'm here. We start to look at where is it coming from. From Bloemfontein, it's Basotho. Basotho thing. They've got their own miracles, and we stop it. It's happening even in Nigeria. If an innovation happens from Yoruba side, they will say, the Igbo will say, Yorubas. So that tribalism is across Africa. That is why our innovations, I see them as not happening. Decolonization, we are concentrating mostly on languages. We want to decolonize our languages. As the last speaker said, what about our innovation? Even white innovations in South Africa. WhatsApp started from Mix It. Mix It started in South Africa. But as Prof has mentioned, the policy makers. And policy makers are advised by us in this room, politicians. What are we advising them? To say, do away with Mix It, to go to China and becomes 10 cents, multi-billionaire company. So it's tribalism. Which tribe is in power in an African country? Then the other tribes are not there, not visible. Then the ideology of that tribe will be pushed forward. So we need to, as academics and researchers and leaders, come to our senses and say, let's talk, let's tell ourselves the truth. What do we want? Do we want to push forward this tribalism? Then we won't grow. Majority of the countries that are taking over our technologies, let's look at them. How many tribes do they have? But they sacrifice and said, as a country, let us push this concept. So where do we go from here and what do we do? Let's discuss a lot. There's Sadila there and members of Sadila's committees. Tribalism. It's a nice topic, African digital humanities. It has got African humanities.
So maybe that may be our next summit, tribalism and innovation.
Yes.
Digital humanities. Okay, thank you, Prof. For breaking, and colleague next to you. There's two in the front, third row.
Thank you for the panel. Thank you for, I like this discussion that you are in now. Yeah, let's give you an example. When the trade war started in 2011, with China surpassing the USA, then the tech companies, they invest in Silicon Valley. And based on that, they have, like for example, advantage over China. But what the Chinese government decided in 2014, and we was part of BRICS, at that moment we was discussing as South African part of BRICS, how will we digitalize our humanity? China took a deliberate decision that they want to move away from the New Collins system. They introduced their own way. When I was working with the Smart Learning Center in Beijing Normal University, they gave me a particular email address. And they asked me, why did I give OpenAI my Gmail account? Because you're feeding the system and you ended up holding the system. And all of you in this room have a Gmail account. So my question is, why are you feeding that system? If that system is working against you, right, to oppress you. China did the following. They then, the small tech companies getting funding to digitalize their humanities. Number one, DeepSeek was launched in January. And DeepSeek was now the opposition to all the OpenAI tech companies and others. And now Donald Trump starts now with the trade war to stop that. We in Africa have the most resources, because economics is my subject. They have the best resources, and we need to start thinking. One of my students was doing a master's in the Koi, the real dance. There was nothing on ChatGPT. There's nothing on the web. She went there to record those oral traditions, that songs, what that mean in Afrikaans, because it's in the Northern Cape. And it was then translated. And I asked her not to feed the Gmail account with that information, but let it be. Now we're sitting with a problem where to publish that, because it will come back into the Google and stuff, and then they will feed the system. We in Africa have the capacity to, in the next, we will see, we will have the means to develop our own apps, like Mixit went to WhatsApp, selling to America, they're making the money. So the nuclearism, they always control it, but we need to do something about us. What we can do in the next couple of years, we need political will, number one. Number two, we need to have a clear policy on AI. By the way, that part is still in draft format. The new framework on AI is still in draft format by the Department of Communications Technology. I responded to that, and so on and so on. But we can do something in our space. Thank you.
Okay. Got one more behind and the last one in the front.
Good morning, colleagues, and I really enjoy the topic because it's close to my heart. I've done my PhD on digital anthropology and looked into how Africans behave and interact, so that at least, shows that we can utilize what the West provide in a positive way. But I am totally against the way we as Africans see ourselves. We need to decolonize our minds and the way we see and perceive ourselves. We have, a tendency to inferiorize us, what we do as Africans, and then we superiorize what the West is doing. That is in every aspect, and I often say this when we gather together. The fact that we appreciate a child who speaks in a very nice English, tone, English, and then we inferiorize the other child who doesn't speak English in the same way. We have to start appreciating ourselves as Africans. What I want to share is that I live both in South Africa and the United States. And I'm both a US citizen and a South African. But I always say I'm a South African first. What I see happening currently in the West and what Trump is doing is because they realize that we are so dependent on them in every aspect. If we as South Africans, and Prof said some of the critical issues that I wanted to mention, if we see ourselves and we utilize the brilliant brains that we have in our country, in UNISA, I'm going to be biased, in UNISA, we should utilize those minds to start creating our own technologies so that we stop being dependent. I live in the United States, and I noticed that I've never seen anything positive about us as South Africans. In fact, when I say I'm a South African, the only thing that they hear is African. Oh, do you know someone in Cameroon? They have no idea who we are as South Africans and what we can produce. So we have to start, and I haven't seen, and what they show on TV, in the United States, is the back streets of South Africa. And that's why I was asked once, do you have water in South Africa? And I'm like, yeah, fortunately, I had a picture where, I was in Durban, and I was like, yeah, we do have water. Is that what you mean? Because that was the context in which it was raised, that we don't have water. People, colleagues, let us go out there and show Trump that we cannot be bullied by him forever. It has to stop now. Thank you.
Thank you. And then one more in the front.
IKS is actually an area of interest for me. And I become as much as it sounds very impressive to hear people talking about developing archives of oral histories, traditions, and texts. But I'm very skeptical in terms of how this information is actually used. So somehow I think my question to the panel would be, how would the indigenous people's interests, how are those going to be protected? And also the whole questions of patency in terms of ownership, control, and benefit sharing related to this knowledge. Because somehow I feel like there's always an issue of misappropriation of this knowledge, as well as exploitation of indigenous people. So my concern is, how are we going to ensure that indigenous knowledge, or the indigenous IKS as you use in digital projects, indigenous people are not exploited and their interests are actually protected?
Thanks.
I think that's what I would do.
Perfect. So I'm going to give you, as we round up, a minute to respond to any of the comments, questions that you want to. Yes, go ahead.
I think the issue around data harvesting, data theft, it's an issue that we can never ignore and undermine. Because of our heritage, the oral tradition, it has always been easy for people to steal from us. And when it comes to copyright, pretend that they are original owners of this information. And therefore, it simply says that we as African scholars need to start recording all our activities. And of course, that is something that has always been there, because if you look at the Timbuktu writings, for instance, manuscripts, the tradition of writing down has always been there. But somehow we tend to ignore that aspect that we need to record. And then the second issue that I want to touch base with is what I've learned yesterday with our students, which is part and parcel of what we mean when we call for Ubuntuification of digital humanities. They did not go for individual brilliance. They went for collaboration. Yeah. They worked together, even from different spaces. They use technology to be able to work as a community. And that's the rich heritage that we bring on the table. Yeah. That in the main, we are people who want to be seen to be working as a community. And that we should be able to advance when we talk digital humanities. And lastly, we need to deal with the geopolitics around vulnerabilities and access. And for us to be able to deal with that, we must address the elephant in the room, which is your capitalist mentality, consumer mentality, commercialization. Because these are the things that are making sure that, for instance, the majority of people in Africa will not have access because data is expensive. That monopoly must be addressed and be addressed fast.
Yeah.
Prof is giving the mic to me. Yeah, thanks, Prof. Look, on a lighter note, I think around the question of brooms flying and so forth, Prof. One of my, and I think I would have mentioned this, I think last week, one of my favorite academics currently in South Africa, Professor Francis Nyamjo at UCT, has a very interesting paper on how technology and artificial intelligence is the new juju, essentially, the West African concept. And I think that is a very interesting paper to read. And the argument, I think similar arguments that he makes broadly around these concepts. On the question of innovation, I do think that, yes, we need to be intentional in terms of innovation. And I think that our universities should be playing leading roles in terms of that. I think it was Dr. Naledi Pandor who was critiquing African and South African universities in terms of the lack of, and not being intentional, or maybe being aggressive in terms of innovation. That being said, I do think that we should not undermine the advances that we have made with regards to innovation. And I think that within the continent itself, whether one looks at West Africa or East Africa or Southern Africa, in terms of some of the strides that we have made, for instance, entire industries have emerged in West Africa, and one of the industries that one can look at is Nollywood, and how we have used modern technologies to actually tell African stories in ways that Hollywood would never have told those stories. So I think it's things that we need to look at and pat ourselves in the back. If one looks at the finance industry and the advances that we have made, I think particularly by East Africa when they developed M-Pesa to deal with the issues of the unbanked community, which would have been recognized within the continent itself. It illustrates the ways in which we look at our circumstances and use technology to address those issues. And the fact that the continent, I think that probably in terms of age, our continent probably at the moment or in the next couple of years will have the youngest people in the world. And that obviously has an opportunity for us to innovate. And lastly, I do think that as much as, yes, we need to stop being the consumers of other technologies, I do think that we should take advantage of the technologies that already exist. Industries are already emerging that speak to our own circumstances and using the technologies that are available at our own. For instance, the use of technologies, again, to create films, as an example. Those are the things that would not have been imagined. And it also speaks to the fact that humans do not exist in a vacuum. And we need to take advantage of that. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Johannes, and then Jessica.
Thank you. So to the question of the communities and whether they are being exploited or whether they benefit from all this innovation that we are doing. So in a different gathering, I did raise that issue where I was asking whether community engagement shouldn't rather be termed community exploitation, because basically we go to people, we take from them, we produce these beautiful things that they are not benefiting from. However, there's also the question of what do we want? So, yes, the projects like Masakani and Lilaba AI and etc. are beautiful because they are trying to bring Sisutu AI, where you can talk to what in Sisutu using African knowledges and etc. Sure, but there's the aspect that whatever data that they have, wherever they have it stored and wherever they have it copyrighted and so on, will still be accessed by these gurus in the industry, because they have an understanding that we will pay a fine. Yeah, we will pay a fine. But it doesn't mean that because they have been fined and they've paid the fine, when you go to ChatGPT and you say, tell me about the koi in South Africa, it will say, I don't know. It will tell you, they paid the fine. So it doesn't matter to them whether you take them to court and so on, they will access that data. Now, to us, the question is, just because they are going to exploit us, does it mean we don't need to record this for ourselves then at least, or for our future generations, just because we know that we are going to be exploited? So that could be something else that we think about. Yes, the community, one of the presenters here yesterday said something about making things an afterthought and having to rethink that and starting there in terms of accommodating. So maybe some of our projects in the digital humanities and AI could also include that. And then in terms of sharing, Prof, our best practices and ensuring that we don't reinvent the wheel over and over again, there are gatherings in the country that are taking place on a yearly basis, some biannually. It is just that fact, the issue that you raised earlier, and I think that was raised also in the audience, the fact that there are these different tribes. So there's DH at UNISA, DH at Mandela, DH at NW, SADILA, UWC, but there isn't DH in South Africa. So in as much as we have an association, it is not all of these structures that are subscribed to the association and are contributing to the discussions in the association. So Prof. Charlie will go invent something and then be praised. I don't know, we have this syndrome of wanting to be first in everything. So we have the first digital humanities professor, we have the first digital humanities post. So there's that whole debate thing that if we are saying we want to hold hands and work together, we need to rethink and try to see how we can address it. So such gatherings are very important. If you allow me just 30 seconds, I'll say one such gathering is happening from the 10th of November. It's hosted by the CSIR. They are hosting the Digital Humanities Conference. Anyone who's working in digital humanities is invited to submit a full paper. A short paper is 4 pages long using our template. A long paper is 8 pages long. The submission will be in July. The theme is the humanities, the role of humanities in digital humanities and artificial intelligence.
Thanks. And that's the executive member speaking in marketing. Please go ahead, Jessica, your last comment.
Thank you so much. Johannes took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah, we have a lot of resources in South Africa. We just need to put them together and make something tangible out of them. We also have a tendency of not improving on our resources. And that is a big problem. We spoke about Mixit, starting off with Mixit, going over all the way to what is now X and so on. And we don't do that. We start something, it doesn't work, we throw it away. If we were to learn from our mistakes and grow and develop from there, I think we would have something much greater than where we sit now, still trying to say that 10 years down the line we spoke about and still things are not happening. And also, again, bringing the resources together. Johannes mentioned it very well. I try so hard, being from Sadela, not to associate myself with a university because I want to be friends with all the universities. And immediately when I say I'm hosted at Northwest University, people think, oh, shucks, so you belong to NWU. No, but we can't deal with them because they've got this problem. I'm trying to explain, no, I don't belong to NWU. I've got notes at UNISA, I've got notes at UP, and then I'm starting to throw names just so I can be appreciated and welcome into the circle. But we shouldn't be doing that. We should be looking at how much resources do you have? What do you have? What has failed for you? What is working for you? Let's put these together. Let's grow and make it a bigger project. We should be looking at what are the people's needs, not our own needs. Not that we're trying to prove that we are greater than the next person. Not that we're trying to show the principal of the school that we can get 100% distinction, 100%, while so-and-so is getting a minimum, the bare minimum, and they're not working, or we're trying to prove other people bad, and we're just not producing because we are not doing the fundamental, is working together and developing and doing it for the people. So, I think definitely let's look at what is available out there. Let's stop tribal segregating and let's work together, and definitely we could do something much better than what we're doing right now.
Thanks, and I think that's actually a beautiful note for us to end. Please put your hands together for the panel. And can quickly just